Welcome to part 2 of Buying and Selling My Home. In part 1 of this presentation, we introduced you to the concept of the price continuum, or relevant dollar range, which comes into play when negotiating a home sale. We also introduced you to the line of magic that can occur if there is an overlap between a home seller's bottom dollar and a home buyer's top dollar. You will recall that those factors influencing the desire of the buyer can shift their top dollar up, while factors affecting a seller's need to sell will force their bottom dollar down. In this part, we will focus on the single greatest deterrent to a fast and profitable sale. Far and away the most common and most significant factor responsible for driving down a seller's bottom dollar. We are talking, of course, about an initial asking price that is too high. Here's how it works. Naturally, every seller wants to get the most they can for their home. The tendency is to gamble. We can always drop the price later, but we might get lucky. But the reality is actually the opposite, and your home may not be the wisest asset with which to gamble. By overpricing at the outset, the chances of getting top dollar are almost zero. Why is this? At any given time, namely the first few days of listing your home for sale, there will be a limited number of buyers that are interested in your property. If an otherwise legitimate buyer perceives too great a gap between what they'd like to spend and you, the seller, might be willing to accept, they will strike your property off their list. The chances of them ever looking at it again are very slim unless, over time, two things happen. One, they have yet to purchase someone else's property, and two, the asking price for your property has gone down. Without the overlap, or at least the reasonable potential for one, the line of magic simply does not exist. Buyer never meets seller, no sale. This is where time comes in, and the seller is forced to consider the hard reality of that first price drop, assuming they are serious about selling. For perspective, it's important to remember that about 90% of all MLS listings have already been on the market for more than 30 days. Perhaps even more interesting is the fact that most home sales that occur within any given month are homes that have been listed for less than 30 days, so that number is probably even higher. The fact is that virtually all properties that have not been sold within 30 days will undergo a price drop. And keep in mind that, at this point, the age of the listing alone will turn back a certain number of the new pool of potential buyers. Those buyers that were lost in the past 30 days, even with a price drop, are mostly gone forever. So what does the first price drop cost the seller? Well, it is often as much as 5% of the initial asking price, but it is almost never less than $5,000. Of course, this says nothing of the emotional cost of the seller's growing frustration and stress. In the end, the seller will have to agree to one or more price drops as time goes on, and their necessity to sell forces their bottom dollar down. Ultimately, a new line of magic gets established that is further down the price continuum than if the seller had agreed to a lower initial asking price at the outset. So if your realtor recommends that you list your home at a price that is lower than what you expected, they are doing so in your very best interests. But, as so often happens, when the client insists on a higher asking price, the realtor gets put in an awkward situation, one that could cost them the listing to a competitor. Less busy, or less professional, realtors would rather agree to the higher price point, knowing the property has a very slim chance of selling. This is known in the industry as buying the listing, which may have obvious benefits to the realtor in terms of getting their name out and controlling the listing, but does little to help the client sell their home, and is obviously detrimental to the accuracy of the so-called comparables on the market. Any home that is reasonably priced and the most presentable of all the others in its price range will sell, period. By carefully assigning a realistic asking price for your property, the buyer's perceived gap is less, which in turn maximizes the size of your buyer pool. most importantly perhaps, is that now that the buyer's interest has been captured, the seller has the opportunity to employ home staging to create desire in the buyer, pushing their top dollar up, often dramatically. The actual gap can be closed, and now you, the seller, will receive the most money possible when the property sells. Up until now, we have described home staging as having the impact of stretching the buyer's top dollar up to extend the line of magic. Plus, we have shown that the line of magic disappears altogether when a seller tries to set an unrealistically high asking price, ultimately prolonging the sale and forcing them to settle for much less. Home sellers who utilize home staging are shrewd. They realize that the product they are selling is no longer their home, but rather someone else's new home. They are handsomely rewarded for it. But is it possible to quantify the real rate of return on the investment a home seller makes when hiring a home stager? In fact, it is possible. Probably the best measure is the length of time it takes to sell a home. The economic advisor for the British Columbia Real Estate Association says that the sale of 14 or 15 properties for every 100 MLS listings in a 1-month period represents what they refer to as a balanced or healthy market. This is in stark contrast to compelling statistics being gathered by the Housse, a rental resource center for home stagers in Victoria, BC. In fact, what they have found is that for every 100 properties that have been staged by professional home stagers, 71% will sell in an average of 3.8 weeks. That's about 5 times faster than the MLS's balanced market. Time is always money, but never more so than when it comes to selling your home. When coupled with what we have learned about price drops, the Housse is comfortable with the claim that home-staged properties will garner about 5% more than equivalent unstaged properties. For the average priced home in Victoria, BC, that translates into a $22,500 return directly into the pocket of the owner of the home. According to the Housse, the average cost for home staging is between $2,500 and $3,000. For a $3,000 investment over 30 days, that means a return of 220%. A common lament heard from realtors is, "My client can't afford to home stage." The irony of this misnomer speaks for itself. If someone said they could take your $3,000 and convert that into $22,500 in the next 30 days, wouldn't you try very hard to come up with $3,000? Realtors need to make it clear to their clients that they can't afford not to home stage. So to say that the role of home staging is to stretch the line of magic into a higher dollar range is probably an understatement. More aptly, home staging completely resets the line of magic in favor of the seller by a factor of about 5% of whatever a home sells for. It represents the single greatest investment opportunity available to any person who has been wise enough to be a homeowner in the first place. And finally, the big winner from staging a home is the owner. It is the seller who will pocket the money.